Content, Module 8, Corpus type, nature of application. So, in this module, we are going to discuss the types of corpus based on the nature of application of the texts with reference to English and other languages. Here also, we are also going to discuss and show how each corpus in different form are utilized in different works with specific composition and content. So, in this module, we will discuss only parallel corpus, translation corpus, aligned corpus, comparable corpus, reference corpus, learner corpus, and opportunity corpus. So, since these different types of corpora are being discussed here based on their application, let us be sure that there is a high chance of overlap among those corpora. So, whenever we say that it is a parallel corpus, that does not mean that some of its properties may not be similar to that of a translation corpus or a reference corpus. So, since they have specific applications in different domains of linguistic research and applications and research and investigation, we identify them as unique and try to identify those corpora keeping in mind the application or goal. So, whenever we say it's a parallel corpus, we take for granted that there are corpus of two languages which are put side by side, and they have certain amount of similarities in their constructions and composition and texts and content. So, parallel corpus normally can have between two languages, but if required, if it is extended to multiple languages, then it is also possible that we can have a kind of extended version of the parallel corpus, which you can call as multiple language corpus or comparable corpus, although comparable corpus in true sense of the term actually differ from the parallel corpus because of the compositions. In case of parallel corpus, what happens? We have parallel texts. Say, one text is taken from newspaper text, and other one is also taken from another newspaper text and put side by side together to treat it as a parallel corpus. It's basically a bilingual corpus where there are a lot of similarities between the texts. Also, a bilingual corpus can be made a parallel corpus when there is a typological or genealogical close proximity related to the languages, and in most cases the texts of the languages with the translations from one language to another may be included in the text of parallel corpus. When a parallel corpus is developed, there is no limit about the content, the total amount of data. So, we can have large amount of data within a parallel corpus, keeping in mind various applications. The issues that usually haunt parallel corpus generators are the following. First one, construction. It includes the process of identification of texts and harvesting a parallel corpus with the texts. Evaluation. That means it involves a methods for evaluating the quality of a parallel corpus as well as the quality of the texts included in it. It also involves the question of tool creation. This relates to the development of tools for processing a parallel corpus, such as tools for sentence alignment, word alignment, phrase alignment, lexical equivalent extractions, and detection of omissions and gaps in translations and others. Lastly, we have to keep in mind the issues of application of parallel corpus. It deals with the utilization of parallel corpus in language processing, such as new texts generation, corpus annotation, translation memory generation, and many others. So, in principle, parallel corpus has tremendous value, particularly in cases of translation also in cases of bilingual teaching and machine learning also. The second is translation corpus. Translation corpus is slightly extended version of parallel corpus. As you say, a translation corpus consists of original texts from the source language and its translation from the target language. So while parallel corpus doesn't have the obligation to be translation from one language to another, in cases of translation corpus, it is mandatory that the text should be one text, should be the source text, another text is a target text. It suggests that it contains texts and their translations. Therefore, it is entitled to include bilingual and multilingual texts if possible. It can contain just anything that fits under the notion of translation. A translation corpus differs from a parallel corpus on the point that while a translation corpus represents text in translation, a parallel corpus does not do that. A parallel corpus rather allows one to compare, for example, L1 texts of a particular genre with L2 texts of the same genre. In that case, it is better to consider a parallel corpus as a specialized sample of monolingual corpus, which is similar in principle of corpus of texts. The compilation or generation of a translation corpus is a typical complicated task. It requires careful guidance from the experienced corpus linguists who have long exposure to the task of corpus generation. A translation corpus should be made in such a way that it is suitable to combine the advantages of a comparable corpus as well as a parallel corpus. Text samples from the source and the target languages should be matched as far as possible in terms of its text type, subject matter, purpose, and register. The structure of a translation corpus may be envisaged if we keep in mind that those two languages are similar in content, text type, and register variables. We will be providing some tree diagrams or images diagrams to show how parallel corpus may be generated. Some important issues, some basic principles are to be considered while developing a parallel corpus. Samples of recent text only should be included in a translation corpus. Texts obtained from speech are normally ignored here because the present activities of language technology and linguistics target only written texts. Second, texts that are included in translation corpus are expected to reflect on contemporary language use, although texts of earlier ages may be of certain relevance in cases of translating historical texts. Translation corpus should not be restricted to any text type of a specific regional or a language variety. It should include a wide range of texts obtained from all possible domains and disciplines of language use. Text samples from both the languages should be comparable as far as possible. Text should match in genre, say news texts, type, say political texts, content, say election, and form, say report. They should also match in terms of purpose, type of user, subject matter, and register variables. Texts included in translation corpus should consist of a fairly large and coherent extracts of texts selected from the beginning to the end of a breaking point, say chapter, sections, paragraph from a piece of text. So this is how a translation corpus is normally built up. In our subsequent modules, we'll go more into details about parallel translation corpus. Now we are talking about aligned corpus. An aligned corpus, in principle, is a kind of translation corpus where texts from one language and their translations from other language are aligned paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, phrase by phrase, word by word, or even character by character. For instance, the Canadian Hansard corpus is a bilingual aligned corpus where English texts and their French translations are aligned at sentence, phrase, and at word level. Both the parallel corpus and the translation corpus are usually used for making an aligned corpus, as these are already modeled and designed to be used simultaneously for various cross-linguistic applications and research in mainstream linguistics and language technology. So, alignment of texts is a tough task. One has to have good exposure to both the languages when the corpus are being aligned. So, it is always better to align the corpus at the sentence level at the initial stage, so that further fine-tuned or alignment at the smaller units is comparatively easier either by machine or by man. Next issue is comparable corpus. A comparable corpus, as the name suggests, is a corpus that contains several sets of texts produced independently of each other from a single language. These texts are considered to be comparable among each other on certain aspects of the language. For example, we can develop a comparable corpus comprising texts of different genres from the same language on the ground that these texts are originally written in the same language, but they belong to different ages, geographical areas, or domains. That means it is very much possible to generate a corpus which is comparable between two or more variations or variant forms of the language. For instance, if we develop a comparable corpus in Bangla, we can have a large chunk of data from legal texts, from scientific texts, literary texts, media texts, medical domains, text from poetry, text from drama, conversational texts, dialogic texts, monologic text, dictated texts, oration texts, narrative text, commentary texts. So, all those texts can be compiled together to form a comparable corpus. In fact, since there is no agreement on the nature of similarity among the texts included, as there are very few examples of comparable corpus still available across the globe, similar texts are usually selected from more than one variety of a language to constitute a comparable corpus. One of the unique examples of comparable corpus is the International Corpus of English, which contain around 1 million words in each of the varieties of English used in different countries. It is assembled following the same model which prescribes times, genres, quality of words to be gathered in each geographical version of the corpus. The recent effort of the European Commission to develop a comparable referent corpus among the European languages is a fine example of a comparable corpus. So, although there is not much effort made to develop initially comparable corpus across several languages or within a single language, efforts are being made to develop comparable corpus, because that gives a far better opportunity to study language across borders. Now, reference corpus. A reference corpus is designed to provide comprehensive information about a language in its global frame. It is bound to be very large enough to represent all relevant varieties of a language, as well as all its general and special characteristic features so that it is fit to be fruitfully used as the most reliable linguistic resource for the study and description of a language, designing grammar books, writing primers, compiling dictionaries and thesauruses, and developing language reference materials. That means a reference corpus is the most valuable and the most reliable resource for knowing a language. A reference corpus includes both spoken and written texts, both from formal and informal sources of language use. Thus, it represents a large collection of texts, samples, already reflecting on the various social and situational variations registered in language use. For generating such a corpus, the method of selecting text samples needs to be defined on a number of points and parameters that will provide suitable basis for including as many varieties as possible to obtain and store the data in machine readable form. Also, it prescribes a proportional measure for representation of each text selected for inclusion in the corpus. On the other hand, for the purpose of quick access and easy reference to the texts in the corpus, all text samples are ordered in a very hierarchical manner so that it becomes easy to refer to a particular type of text whenever required. So, reference corpus is mostly most valuable resource for writing a dictionary or describing a language in its full details. Not much effort has been made in many of the languages to develop a reference corpus. So, we can have only a few examples of reference corpus at present. The Bank of English is perhaps the most widely known reference corpus in English across the countries. At present, it covers nearly 5 million of words obtained from all possible domains of language use and across the nations. So, it is always structured in such a manner that the resources are tagged with specific register variables and time so that people can retrieve or extract relevant information from those texts whenever it is possible. Now, the learner corpus. A learner corpus is generated with limited collections of text produced by language learners. As the name shows, the texts should be produced by the learners only. The corpus should maintain both written and spoken text samples in a uniform manner so that we know how learners use language in their writing as well as in their speech. That means a learner corpus is made with language used by the learners only and nobody else. If we create such a corpus, we should definitely concentrate on systematic collections of text written and spoken by learners. For example, the Texas Association of School Administrators has generated a corpus, namely the TASA, which contains 10 million words of unmarked high school level social studies and business. These are basically English texts coming from all domains of learners who are studying arts, health science, economics, industry, relations, management, and all those things. So, another good example is Childish Language Database, where the learners has produced the text, and the database contains the texts which have been generated learners by their regular interactions. So, these texts are mostly used for the studies in child language acquisitions and language pathologies. So, learner corpus is very much important, particularly in the area of developing strategies, methods and resources in the area of language teaching. Next is opportunistic corpus. An opportunity corpus usually refers to a moderate collection of electronic texts which are obtained, converted and used free of cost. That means it is a kind of corpus which often fails to adhere to the rules and principles applied in the formations of corpus in general. Due to its free availability, it is mostly found in unfinished form and incomplete in information. Therefore, corpus users are free to fill in the blanks in the corpus by themselves with texts of their own choice. That means an opportunity corpus is a kind of virtual corpus in the sense that the selections of text from an opportunity corpus is largely based on the requirements of a particular project. The academic and referential value of the corpus is often bound with its situation, where size, composition, access and utility do not pose problem for making the statement about a language or a variety. For example, if we collect tweets from net and assemble together, we perhaps can call it an example of an opportunity corpus. In conclusion, the classifications presented here, also in other places, in other modules, earlier modules, are not absolute and binding, since these are open for continuous modifications based with new ideas, new concepts, new type of data acquired for generating a corpus. Also, we know that besides those classifications, we can also introduce some different types of parameters such as open versus close, synchronic versus diachronic, historical or contemporary, dialectal or standard, idiolect or sociolect corpus and many others. So, the classification scheme is therefore open for reclassifications based on the availability of data in years to come. What we understand from this scheme of classification presented here, that corpora are being developed in so many varieties, in so many types, in so many ways, that any well-defined frame of classification is not adequate enough to address those things. So, we have to keep in mind that this scheme will only give some ideas how to deal with the corpora now available to us. One important point to be noted here, the referential value of corpus is priceless, particularly in the area of language technology, language teaching, dictionary compilation and text analysis. So, considering the amount of importance it enjoys, language corpus is likely to grow in quality, in quantity and in diversity in the coming years. People from every branch of linguistics are now using corpora as a source of a living and regularly used language to explore the new horizons as well as to start advanced research which are not possible even a few decades ago because of the lack of language corpora. Now we are in a better position, better equipped to do many new studies on language and the properties with the availability of language corpora of different types. Thank you.